for coming. We are going to start in a few minutes, maybe in a few seconds, because I see that many people are now connected through our Zoom platform, and everybody is already here. Professor Pellicciari. So I will leave first the room to the Vice, I would say, Deputy Rector, Professor Vieri Fusi. Thank you, Professor, for coming here.
Welcome and good morning to everyone. I bring you the greetings of our Rector, Professor Giorgio Cagnini, my personal greetings, and of the University of Urbino. It's a great pleasure to be here hosting so many leading persons, as well to see the rooms full of participants, and also I wish to welcome the people online. Thanks to Ambassador Giorgio Starace for being here. He has been Ambassador of Italy in Russia, and so for sure he'll be able to develop the issue of this morning from a special point of view, and to give us, I suppose, some hints, some highlights about the situation in Ukraine and probably in Russia. I also wish to thank Professor Pellicciari for his effort in the argument and to share with us his experience in the international affairs. In addition to be our colleague, he is a diplomat of the Republic of San Marino and currently ambassador of the Kingdom of Jordan, right? Last but not least, thanks to the organizers, Nicola, Giannelli, the Antonello Zanfei, all the PhD School of Global Studies for organizing this event. The title of the seminar of this morning, Discussant, is a topic of the moment. World aid, interventionist, aid and war in Ukraine, so strongly timely. We have on the wall, stop to the war in Ukraine. The problem of the war and of the AIDS involves not only Ukraine in this moment, but unfortunately so many other countries. It is not our vision. Honestly, I'd prefer to, but I'm sure that all of you would prefer, as in the song of John Lennon, Imagine, no? That all the people live in peace, and all the people sharing all the world. But it's not like that now, so we are called with our action and aid, with our knowledge to pursue such goals, because we want a world in peace. Well, welcome again. I apologize all the speakers that I have to leave the rooms for some moments because there has been an overrun institutional commitment, and I wish you a very interesting morning full of discussion and of idea. Thanks and welcome again.
Thanks, Professor Fusi, for the greetings of the University of Urbino. I want to explain that these initiatives started inside the module of geopolitics of the doctorate in global studies of the University of Urbino, and that's why it is spoken in English and not in Italian, because the doctorate is taught in English language because it is open to students coming from all over the world. So that's why we want to be understandable for everybody. And I want to thank Professor Pellicciari for coming here, and mostly, of course, the Ambassador Starace for coming from Rome directly here. Thanks two times, thanks twice. And I want to suggest that this initiative was starting from when I asked to Professor Pellicciari to come here and explain his second work about AIDS, because he printed a previous work, just a few years ago, in 2022, I guess, as I well remember, but before the starting of the war, as long as I remember. And already there was a framework, a theoretical framework that was very interesting, as long as I remember, for our students that were attending at the seminar inside the geopolitics module of our doctorate. And then this second work was even more interesting because the same theoretical framework and the same way of telling things and explaining things has been very useful for understanding what happened between Russia, European Union, United States, and Ukraine, because these are the main players of the landscape that is told in the last work of Igor Pellicciari, and which is the main goal of the framework, to understand that AIDS are a way of foreign policies. Then they turn to dramatic facts that we know, but maybe I can say that what is more interesting in the book of Professor, and in the work, in the research of Professor Pellicciari, are the things that went before the war, because there, as Professor Pellicciari explains very well, there is a competition between different ways of AIDS as a way for influencing this area from considered sometimes strategic, but sometimes not so much strategic, because there are periods that you explained in which this was quite relinquished, not at the focus of the attention of the main players. And even, is I guess, and then Professor Pellicciari will explain much better than I can do, even the Russians maybe underestimated how crucial it was to invest in its influence. And their aid was taken for granted, as you said, both from Ukrainians and maybe also for Russians, and they did not focus enough. And also, European Union maybe did not invest enough in attention, in paying attention to what it was doing. So I will leave the room to Professor Pellicciari to explain to the audience here and at home which are the main points of the construction of this competition between sphere of influence inside this area. Thank you, Professor Pellicciari, for your presentation. Can you see the slides at home?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Okay. Perfect. Sorry, I just have to put a timer because otherwise, it's so nice to see you all guys that I could go on forever, but I don't want to go forever. So I will. Okay, guys, so nice, first of all, to see you. It's been a long time, and well, I don't want to get very emotional here, but it's really nice to see you guys. Thank you, Nicola. Thank you, Rector. Thank you, Pro-Rector. Thank you, Igor. Thank you, everybody. Professor Zanfei, thank you so much for insisting, for giving me this opportunity. I feel really blessed for this, and I prepared some slides here, and look. Ambassador Starace, I mean, you made me such an honor to come here today. This is actually turning the thing other way around. I mean, you're the star today. So I'm just gonna take half an hour to, just very briefly tell you about my book, which is quite a dense book of conclusions. And then I would like to give you the flow, asking you not just to be the discussant on the book. You're a unique opportunity here to tell us. You've been ambassador to Moscow until just 2 months ago, and so very interesting time, and so probably your view on what's going on and how the thing is rolling and what might be the outcome, a part of the propagandas and wishful thinkings, because now we are inevitably into this phase of analysis. I would like you to give you more flow on this. So, qua come cambio le pagine? Okay. So, yeah, I'm presenting today this book of mine, World War VIII, Interventionist Aid and War in Ukraine, which was just released for Routledge. The foreword is by Romano Prodi, and this is, as Nicola outlined quite correctly, is a follow-up, immediate follow-up, which had also health consequences on me because it was really killing to write 2 books in a row of this other book, whose title was quite ambitious, Reframing Foreign Aid History and Politics from the Fall of the Berlin Wall to the COVID-19 Outbreak, which was released 1 month before the Russians' invasion to Ukraine. So you can imagine, and the foreword was by late Franco Frattini, another incredible expert on international, an actor of international relations that we unfortunately lost recently. And so the 2 books are somehow interrelated, and well, we'll see also at the end. I have 10 slides, so don't be scared. I'm going to get very fast on that. Disclaimer, listen, we are in academia. Academia should be a place where emotions are not kept aside, but are kept under control, okay? Max Weber tells us that we should acknowledge our values, never forget our values, but somehow isolate them during the analysis in order to have an objective analysis. So it's like, you put your values in the fridge and then you take them out. You don't forget your values. However, the fact that we're talking about a very sensitive topic, for me particularly sensitive because I have lots of friends in Russia and in Ukraine. I lived in Moscow for almost 15 years, but I lived in Ukraine, in Kiev, for 3 years. And so I wanted the first slide to be the foreword, my introduction to the book. I mean, this is chapter 1. And there are 3 sentences which I wanted just to put forward here. First, What you're going to hear today is a descriptive analysis, objective analysis of political interest of the donors and frequent inconsistencies of aid policies, problems of aid policies. You should never see or interpret this as in any way a justification or acceptance of the war in Ukraine, or of the fact that Ukraine had to be assisted during this period, okay? It's like if you write a book on the problems of a hospital, it does not imply that if you get ill, you should cure yourself home and not go to the health system, okay? This would be a suicide. So this is totally analyzing the inconsistencies of a health system does not mean rely on the health system when you have problem, okay? This is how you should understand and frame whatever I'm going to say today. Second, from my first book, one of my favorite sentences is the following one, and it comes out not from my research, but from my lifetime experience in foreign aid. If one has to choose, it's still better to be, for a recipient country, to be invaded by aid rather than by tanks, okay? So you are dominated by aid. Recipients try to avoid aid because aid is an instrument of domination, but if you have no alternative, still better to be invaded by aid rather than by tanks. Am I clear on this? Fine. And the third thing is I dedicated this book. The first book is dedicated to my wife because she's literally the person who keeps me alive physically, because without my wife I would probably be already gone time ago because of my very messy lifestyle. But the second book, The World War Aid, is dedicated to all civilian victims of military conflicts, okay? And why I did this, because I wanted to mark by saying this, no matter how objective the book is, that my personal stand is against unconditional rejection of war. And this is not for an ideological or pacifist position. It's simply because I'm Bosnian origin, I am Italian, but Bosnian origin. I've been through a war, and for me, war is like a headache. I don't know anybody of you who had kidney stones or had a headache and is nostalgic about that. Once you are in a hospital, which unfortunately was a recent condition for me, or once you have a kidney stones or once you have a headache, you just want to get out of it. And you have no nostalgia about that. So for me, going to war is like going to the hospital. I really don't want to go back there. So I want to be very clear in this position. The first thing is, I have to tell you about the approach and the assumption before I keep telling you the conclusions on the book, okay? So I have to tell you, and this is mainly the first book, Reframing Foreign Aid. I am convinced, not only me, but I'm following those convinced that aid between states are a new driver of international relations, especially after the Second World War. Drivers such aid has been a driver, maybe stronger, actually stronger than war and trade, which traditionally have been in the state nations' international environment, main drivers of the international relations. Now we have also aid. The assumptions, I'm going to go very fast on this. The assumptions are that if you read aid between states, I'm only dealing aid between states, okay? I'm not dealing with aid, unconditional aid or any kind of aid between, that will be too complicated. So I'm only interested in aid between states, which is either financed or implemented by state nations. So the three assumptions are, there are many of them, but the three key assumptions are aid is a variable for understanding foreign policy of the states. If you want to understand the foreign policy, you have to rely also on aid policies. Second, donors, state nations, try constantly, sometimes they succeed, sometimes they don't, but try always to have a greater set of interests rather than the recipients. It's a very utilitaristic and very rational, we should not be scandalized. There is nothing moral in what I'm saying. I'm just saying that's foreign policy. Foreign policy was born to defend national interest. And aid, in the moment that aid becomes a pillar of foreign policy, automatically aid is driven by rational choices in a utilitaristic way. Third assumption, there is an increasing number, there are more donors than recipients in the international environment. And this is already something very interesting, right? And by recipients, I don't mean states who have needs. I mean states who are geopolitically interesting enough to attract the donors. We have little countries in crisis with many donors apparently doing the same things. Think Kosovo, think Bosnia, think Afghanistan. So many donors so many donors for one recipient. My analysis and approach is consequent to these assumptions. Donors and recipients, I put them on the same level. I'm not interested in how the aid should be, but what was aid, how it was done. I'm a historian. I need aid to reconstruct international relations. I'm looking for the political motivations, interests in the foreign policy. Both sides, the donors mainly, but also the recipients. Don't forget, recipients try to avoid to get aid. The rule number one is do not get aid unless you really have no other choices, unless the choices is the tanks, right? You don't want to get aid. You don't want to, you want to be the donor. You don't want to be the recipient. Third, the objective of the research is to reconstruct the evolution of the relationship between, dynamics between donor and recipients, foreign policy, right? Diplomatic relations. Fourth, I'm interested in any kind of aid, not only in the good aid. Now, Ukraine helps us now to understand that anything can be aid. But before that, we had very strong assumption that only the good aid is aid. Only the ODA indicator of the United Nations, Official Development Assistance Indicator, is to be considered aid. If you consider aid as a relationship between states, you have to open it to anything, even the bad aid. Actually, the bad aid is more interesting than the good aid. The good aid usually is development aid, is humanitarian aid. You have also to watch financial aid, weapons, technology, human resources. This is aid in all its complexity. This is not just an issue of conceptual issue. It has, for a historian, very direct implications. If I want to understand who is the main donor in the Syrian crisis, if I use the ODA indicator, I'm not sure I would even have Russia in the first three. If I want to understand Russia's role in the Middle East and Russia's success in Syria as a donor, I have to put in the basket all aid, all transactions. And then why I'm doing all this? Again, to see the impact of this in the international system. So I'm not really here, you should not apply to me to ask me how should it be in the best possible way. I'm just telling you how it was, okay? So I'm not against aid, on the contrary. I'm just trying to outline the inconsistencies and eventual evolution and try to understand what can be the implications of this. The World War Aid book has three sets of findings and conclusions. One is, I'm a historian, so I'm looking, thanks also to some Ukrainian friends who are present here, I want to thank. I have been reconstructing, and also myself, I've been living as an expert for the European Commission in Kiev for more than 3 years. I'm trying to reconstruct the 30 years since the independence of Ukraine and the start of the war, at the outbreak of the war, 3 decades in which the same donors who are today facing off in the war, who are fighting in the war, indirectly, directly, it doesn't matter, where the donors, the same, were competing through aid on Ukraine. So this area of the, so it's a very interesting, and this is the first slides later on. Second, the core of the book are 8 technical and political peculiarities which make interstate aid in Ukraine unique. Again, no positive, no negative, unique. Third, usually historians are not supposed, I mean, I'm making political, conceptual, and historical implications because that's my approach on aid. I mean, so how the Ukrainian case impacts on the political, conceptual, and historical evolution of aid, and then future forecast. I know I'm a historian. Usually historians are not really supposed to make forecasts, but you know, you have also to sell some books when you have a British editor. So, you know, that's inevitable. You have to do that. You know, if you wanna be paid for writing a book instead of paying to write a book, right? Which is kind of the paradox of nowadays. Okay, so the first slide is, I'm 15 minutes. I can do it in another 15 minutes, so it's okay. The aid war, I will not go in detail. I'm just saying that these 30 years are fundamental to understand the symptoms of the war. Again, be very careful here, not only in my case, but in any case, history does not explain anything. History helps you to understand the context, okay? So it's very dangerous when we use a historical element and we use it as a mechanical way of explaining what just happened. This is not a correct way. It's a very dangerous, usually politics uses history for this, it's a way of instrumentalizing. No. You will not understand why the war started, but you will understand why the room was inflammable, why it could take fire, the elements which was making it particularly vulnerable to specific geopolitical interests. I see some of you are making photographs of this. Don't worry, I mean, I can send you the file later on, so that's, you don't have to buy the book, it's public, so I will send it to you. I'm dividing 4 phases of these 3 decades of assistance to Kiev. And I will go just directly to the conclusions of this. I mean, it's very interesting because, well, we see that the first half of this, so the first 15 years of these 30 years were basically marked by EU approach, mainly EU approach, totally not interested in Ukraine as a candidate, even long-term candidate to the EU family, to the European Union family. It was treated as an interesting area for an economical cooperation, a bridge towards the Russian market. And mainly the programs of assistance were focused on the economic cooperation. The rule of law, democratization, and this is not only in the Ukrainian case. In all the former Soviet Union, the West came mainly in the first 15 years after the breakdown of the USSR, came mainly looking to promote free market economy. This was the key word. The rule of law was, yeah, I mean, the liberal democratic system, well, the two things came together, but then if you see how many resources and what were the consistencies of the contracting tools they were putting in place, you will definitely see how the free market economy was the real driver of that. So Russia's influence on Ukraine, structural somehow, you know, as provider of energy. Okay, don't forget, in the 90s, Russia was very philo-Western, okay? So you don't have to read that part, even the choice of the European Union, as, you know, with the eyes of today. At that time, it was kind of, you know, it was normal. But somehow, we have to wait 2004 to have a really an internal, from within Ukraine, a pro-European ambition, strong pro-European ambition, which on one side is treated always with some suspiciousness from the side of the EU, But after 2004, with the EU enlargement, the new EU member states from the former Warsaw Pact, mainly Poland, start giving greater weight to the idea that you always have the new member states who are EU member states who are pushing to include Ukraine in the European space, and you have the traditional one, Germany, Italy, very, very cautious about that. Very like, yeah, I mean, you know, it's like we would make programs in Ukraine would be included in new neighboring programs. I mean, if you are a neighbor, then you're not part of my family. I mean, you know, I have very good relationship with my neighbor living in my building, but you know, he doesn't have the keys of my house. You know, he's not, you know, he's a neighbor. So if I declare you neighbor, automatically you're not member of my family. I'm sorry. But in 2004 starts this competition in which Ukraine starts pulling geopolitically on the both sides. And we see that like the West trying to include it within its geopolitical space. I would say more from the American side rather than from the European side for the reasons I said before. But on the other side, we have Russia, which starts being aware of the importance of Ukraine and, you know, it's just being more conflictual about the idea of giving up in front of this, you know, European or Western flow. The breaking point is 2014. Why? From a point of view of aid. Because certain events happen. Please don't, I won't start who started first, because you know, when you start a discussion in history on who started first, you're done. You are done. Who went first in Palestine, Israel? You are done. You know, this is not the way you use history, all right? In 2014, from the point of view of aid, the pro-Russian president, Yanukovych, rejects the EU aid, and until then he was trying to play a double stand, you know, play on both sides, be a little bit on the side of Ukraine, to have the economical cooperation with the European Union and the political support from Russia. He is put in front by the Kremlin directly to choose the 13 billion loan from Russia. And this triggers a whole number of reactions, but basically we have the Maidan revolution, we have the donors, Crimea annexed to Russia, and basically it's the end of the donors' competition in Kiev. We have Western donors focusing in Kiev and Russia focusing on the regions of eastern regions. And at that time, to some people, that's why you should look at aid, it became clear that sooner or later there would be a redirezione, because the donors were not competing anymore on the same territory. They were simply divided, fueling the two parts, which then, you know, entered into the shortcut, into the conflict. Then, interestingly enough, after the Crimean crisis, 2014-2022, we have Kiev constantly asking to enter in the European Union, and the European Union still being very careful about that. And in these 8 years which lead to the war, we have the pro-Atlanticist military integration of Kiev going much faster than the EU political integration. The EU political integration is still held aside. It's still kept, somehow looked with suspiciousness from the EU. Now, so this was just to say that, to give you a picture, if you want to know more about it, then you should read the book, because the book goes in detail. But again, there is no moral, there is no bottom end of the story. It's just, you cannot, you should really learn about aid being a tool of competition, of geopolitical competition of these 30 years. That's the bottom line of the thing. Now, I compared the first year of the war in Ukraine with the Bosnian war, the first year of the Bosnian war 30 years before. Why? Well, because the donors are the same. It's a war in Europe. It's the first war in Europe. The last war in Europe before Ukraine was in Bosnia. I mean, it was technically in Kosovo, but let's say, in the Balkans, Bosnia makes it, as an environment, considering the whole Balkans, we can rely on Bosnia. And I find 8 peculiarities, which I find quite incredible in the comparison with Bosnian situation. First of all, we have the speed of reaction of the donors. Again, no bad, no good. I'm just saying this is what happened. In Bosnia, we had intervention of the bilateral donors, of the state nations, 3 years after the start of the war. People were under the siege in Sarajevo for more than 3 years, right? We have here, on the contrary, in the Ukrainian crisis, we have the speed of reaction, immediate speed of reaction of the Western donors, of the Western state nations who react as a donor. It's very interesting, it's a key point. Russia gives up the role of re-emerging donor and goes back to the tanks. The West does not follow Russia on the same path. It prefers to readapt aid, because they had already their structures, their people in Kiev. They readapt the aid machinery to the new context. We have state nations are giving, state donors are giving leadership to the whole aid process, to the keywords. And if you remember, there have been very little other environments, crisis environments, war environments, in which the multilateral organizations were almost invisible. The UN is almost invisible. UNHCR, invisible. You don't see them, right? They're like, UN, the multilateral has been silent and even NATO and the EU, to be frank, they have been following, but at the end of the story, if you see all the milestones of the crisis, we have presidents, state donors, state nations with their leaders directly involved, okay? Then the multilateral, it frames the thing, but you have the clear perception that they're not building up the strategy. A little bit like in COVID-19, in which the vaccine diplomacy was basically driven by state nations, either doing their vaccine in the East or negotiating with the big pharmas, but you would not have the WHO distributing the vaccines. That was not, despite somebody's hope, this did not happen. Third, which is unprecedented, we have a level of involvement of the recipient of Kiev, fantastic. Kiev is not just the recipient Bosnian style. So, which is, it's a partner. It's a geopolitical partner. Which means it's a partner who can negotiate, can influence the structure of the aid, can actually ask officially, can criticize the donors if the aid does not go in their direction. Make no mistakes, I don't like when the leadership in Kiev is designed as a puppets of the US. I think about Karzai in Afghanistan as a puppet of the US, because that guy would do anything which was given, it was totally dependent on the flow of aid coming from, and the support. Here we have a statehood with a leadership which is totally aware. Somehow the leadership of Ukraine, and it's not their fault, becomes stronger when it becomes recipient of aid rather than before the war, which is unprecedented. In Bosnia, when you are the recipient of aid, automatically you are done. It's not in the case of Ukraine. We have never seen in recent history a state recipient of aid getting stronger because of being state recipient of aid. That's, if you think about the Steinmeier's visit, which was canceled, and you have so many elements in which in which the president or the Minister of Foreign Affairs give some very strong statements on how aid should be structured. And the donors are, they just have to swallow it. They would rather, donor always prefers to give you what they want, not what you need. That's the whole part of the business, right, of international relations. No. Here it's like, it's unprecedented, the legitimacy that the Ukrainian leadership has and the impact it has in the structuring of aid. Quite unique. Aid provided, well, quantity, extremely high diversification of aid. I'm going to go very fast now. Then these two elements, which are, one is done by the Europeans. It's, let's go first to the Russians, weaponization of aid. Russia starts using assets which were traditionally given as aid, food, access to energy, and starts limiting treating them as a tactical conflict resource in a very unprecedented manner, because traditionally Russia would use aid in foreign policy by giving an advantageous condition, raw materials, prime materials, and this kind of assets in its position. Now here it's about limiting the access to this. This is unprecedented. So we call this, it was not my definition, weaponization of aid. What is my definition is what the Europeans do. I created this new word definition, which I was allowed to do by my editor. They say it's, and also by my text advisor, how should I call you, Kathy? Just like, whatever, okay. Which is idealization of weapons. It's exactly the opposite to what Russia is doing. So Russia uses food as a weapon. The West starts using weapons as aid. Look, also here, make no mistakes. States have always been assisting each other with weapons, okay? What is unprecedented in the Ukrainian case is that this is done not behind the curtains. It's done officially, and this aid is framed, put on the top, legitimized on the top of the aid interventions. So this is unprecedented in the way it's done. It doesn't mean it's done well, because, I mean, I will not get so much in detail on the thing, but aid is the fact that it's not a traditionally it's a state secret. We know in the past when the Reagan administration was supporting the Contras, you do these things, right? But you do it behind the curtains. Actually, it's a big risk. Like that's the whole point of Mission Impossible movies. Like if you're this message, if you will not deny, this is the point. While here we are having, for many reasons, but we have aid put on the top of the aid, weapons put on the top of the aid intervention. Like, of course, no need to say that this dragged the attention more on the weapons aid rather than humanitarian aid. On one side, I wish Bosnia had, my colleagues had access to weapons which were not given to them because the same donors 30 years before said to the Bosnians, sorry, weapons are not the kind of aid we can give you. I know you are victims, I know you are invaded, but weapons is not. Then they would get it under the table. But officially it was like, no. Aid can only be humanitarian. That was bad news for the Bosnian as a state, but it was good news for the Bosnians because Bosnians were covered by aid individually. Ukrainians, on the contrary, they get a lot of weapon as aid, and as a contrary, I don't know how many Ukrainians I know quite a lot of them, and those which I assisted, because they're my friends, to find an accommodation or somewhere around the world, none of them, they received a little fraction of the humanitarian aid which an average Bosnian would have received 30 years before. So, you know, when you make these choices, it's not just, okay, well, let's present this aid like this rather than that. No, no, it has consequences. One of the consequences is of prioritizing weapons as aid, is that automatically the donors give less aid to the humanitarian side. Okay? Strategy scenario, we have an excessive anticipation of the post-war phase, reconstruction. I mean, just 3 months after the start of a war, which many people, you ambassador, myself, other commentators said, well, this is going to be long. We start having conferences of reconstruction, and donors, state donors, focusing on the business of reconstruction, again, diverting their attention from humanitarian aid. Why should we lose? Let's talk direct. EU accession, which was one of the exclamation points of the process of becoming a new country, being adapted to the political needs. So you would quite correctly tell Georgia or Serbia that they're not ready to speed up their EU process because their justice system is not yet in line with it. But on the other side, you would just forget about these standards in the case of Ukraine. Why? Because, you know, it's a victim of the war, which is, it's delegitimizing a process which was one of the best processes of the European Union, frankly speaking, as somebody who worked so many years for the European Union. Last point, sanctions are used as aid. The recipient partner is involved in the design not only of aid, but also of the sanctions. When the West was helping, the Western part, the donors were helping Sarajevo, they would never ask Sarajevo how they should hit Milosevic. This was really, the two things were separated, as a day and a night. The two things would now never go together. Here, we have sanctions integrated with aid. So in the time that you design aid, you design also the sanctions. And you keep them, and you adjust them according not to your values. You start them according to values, like to punish a breach of international law. But after that, you adapt them according to your tactical needs in a war scenario. And this is also fascinating in a scientific point of view. I mean, morally, of course, nothing is fascinating here. But this is really fascinating to observe. I'm done here. Political implication, conceptual, historical. We are facing, with the COVID-19 and the war in Ukraine, we're having what I call the new interventionist aid phase. It's a phase in which aid is no longer an excuse for the donors to be geopolitically present, and therefore, who cares about aid? Who cares about the effectiveness of aid? Who cares? Who cares? How many times I heard, yeah, it's an evaluation, the project went well, but who cares? Let's do it anyway. Our objective was the political obligation. We want to be there. We want them to control us, to control them through any kind of justification to enter. The interventionist aid has the ambition to influence the course and outcome of the crisis. It's success-oriented. We cannot fail. That's why we cannot upset our partner. It's very substantial and differentiated. We don't need multilateral, governmental, you know, all these NGOs, everything disappeared. No, 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 no. Here, we don't need a Trojan horse. We need the horse. We need to enter there. We don't need a static horse. We just need to be, to intervene in the framing. So, and in order to do this, we are making aid as an essential component of war, officially. Officially, if we say that giving a weapon is as important as, from a human point of view, as giving food is a primary need, we make aid a component of war. I'm going very fast here. World War aid, this is the forecast. So what is the good news here? The bad news is there's going to be a third world war, probably. The good news, not Einstein style, you know, Einstein sentence like, I don't know how, but in the First World War, I know it will be, the combats will be with stones and arrows. No, we will have a situation in which New World Order based on the interventionist aid is a world in which we have widespread low-intensity regional conflicts fought by proxy by regional recipients on behalf of big donors and sub-donors. So, you know, a little bit like in the Cold War, but in a more complex environment, because we don't have just Washington and Moscow. With more technological, you know, we have the drones now, for God's sake, and that's a perfect asset for a, you know, and we're doing this officially. We don't have to hide it behind the curtains. I mean, it's an official, the interventionist state is the pillar, and it's where you frame this ongoing confrontation between the BRICS on one side and the G7 on the other side, in which the G7 is framing intervention as a defense of the liberal rule-based world, and the BRICS are framing their intervention as, hey, let's stop the Anglo-Saxon predominance, and we want a multipolar order. They don't need to frame it in some values, liberal democratic, because clearly their public opinion is less interested in a full-fledged, you know, so they're talking, you know, for real, let's say. And we are going back, this is the final conclusion, to a, like in the Cold War, the East going public, all the main assets are turning in the hand of the states. Energy, you want more energy, you have to ask Putin, I guess, I mean, the Kremlin. You want to have vaccines, likewise. You want to have weapons, likewise. And the West, in which this is owned by big private entities, right? In which the race to the moon is done by 3 tycoons, and NASA is selling its T-shirts in the malls. I mean, that is what we're facing right now, right? So and this system, this is really not ideological, but it has the same impact in division of the 2 ideological worlds, because there is no way these 2 systems can merge, because it will be the end of either of the 2, right? So Musk is more important for Putin than Biden, because Musk controls Starlink. And Biden, yeah, you know, like in the vaccines, you remember. You wanted the vaccines, well, today people don't understand how it's possible that India, who is in conflict with China, is on the side of Russia. Well, maybe one of the reasons is because Russia gave them the vaccines, even which they did not have for the Russians, but they sent them to India. Maybe, I don't know, just, you know. So we have to understand that aid will be an instrument of, you know, this is the interventionist aid. This is the last slide. And they say, usually when you make the diagnosis, I'm making diagnosis, I'm not making prognosis. They tell me, okay, so what now? Like, you know, when you make the diagnosis of a disease, if there is no prognosis, it doesn't make the disease less real, man. So that's the point. And I'm talking by experience right now, you know. So when the doctor met me and I said, well, where is the solution? And he gave me a solution. But then I thought, well, if there was no solution, would this make me less hospitalized? No. So we have to give up this idea that if there is no solution means there is no problem. No, wait, there is a problem and you have to look for a solution. If you ask me, like, you know, this last slide is so done a little bit superficially. If you ask me, what is the solution? I can tell you, going back to the first sentence, better aid than tanks. Let's go back from the thank you, ba-bam, to the thank you approach. How we were better when we were worse, Italian would say, you know? How it was, let's try at least to go back to from the aid to war, back to the aid wars and the donors competition, not let's see who makes better in conquering this environment, which was still a dirty play, but it was foreign policy, and at the end, people will not die. You might have some corruptions, maybe, and this is actually the foreword of Romano Prodi, who said, yeah, no matter how, still, and this is my sentence from the beginning, if I really hope not get again hospitalized, or ill, I will definitely go to the hospital. I will not just, refer to the problems I might have with their food or whatever. You just go there. You try to make it better. So, instead of reinventing the wheel, at least to stop this madness and these civilian victims we are having right now, at least let's go back to the old good days of the competition of wars, Giochi senza frontiere. I mean, just the, you know, this Peter Gabriel song, you know, Words Without Fears, you know? Without tears, I'm sorry, Words Without Tears. So let's go back to the donors competition, and that would be all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Pellicciari. I found it very interesting that you said that the Ukrainian state that used to be quite weak and crony state was able, the rulers were able to build their legitimacy and get stronger through this competition on aid. And maybe this path was not seen at the beginning from Moscow. And that's maybe a path for trying to explain how all things went wrong from our point of view, but also from the Russian point of view. So I would ask to Ambassador to tell the story from another point of view, if it's possible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, let me thank you deeply very much. Great gratitude for the academic board of this prestigious university. It's an honor. It's the first time for me to be at the Urbino University, a university that started the activity in 1506. It's really history. It's prestigious. You must be very, very lucky to study here and to be here. And my admiration goes to everyone that made this very interesting debate possible. First of all, of course, to my very good friend Igor Pellicciari, to the pro-rector, Professor Fusi, to Professor Agnati, and all of you, and all the friends that are connected online. It's an interesting, stimulating subject, a very important point. On my opinion, with his book, Igor clearly put the finger in the plague, and it hurts. It hurts a lot. I mean, he clarified one point that is basic and essential, is in front of all of us. The change of perspective of foreign aid from a foreign aid that had, anyhow, some ethical criteria to be followed, to an instrumental foreign aid. A foreign aid that de facto created a competition between blocs and de facto stimulated a media war, an economic war, and, of course, helped a military competition between blocs. The author was a young boy, and when he lived in the Bosnian conflict. I served my country for more than 30 years, 3 decades. I did not have his traumatic experiences. I am part of a very privileged generation that lived in this building of peace that is the result of one of the most important revolutions of the modern times, the European Union. And I felt so privileged for what my forefathers did and created for me. But no doubt that when I entered as a civil servant to work in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, I have to swear on the Italian Constitution, constitution that I recall you at the Article 11 confirmed that this country, Italy, repudiates war as an instrument of offense. So more than ever, I agree with my friend Igor on his hostility towards any kind of war, particularly the wars that are used as instrument of offense, as the one that is in front of us. Today we're talking about Ukraine, but we can talk about many other models of wars. We have Gaza in this moment as well, and other crises that we saw in the recent times. And in his small, very dense book, rightly, Professor Pellicciari depicted the case and described the case, it's a case study now, of Ukraine, as a radical change that introduced, and an acceleration that introduced in this process of converting intervention in instrument of political initiatives. He was very clear in his analysis, showing how Russia did use the wheat and the wheat war as an instrument of his of its political initiatives, and as the West is doing the same in terms of military assistance. And then we can talk, of course, also about the sanctions and the sanction system, but we would go extremely far. What is, in my opinion, is extremely important of the analysis that comes out from this book is the situation of anarchy that we obtain from this degeneration of the aid system, because the base of the interventionist aid became an important key now for wars, media wars, hybrid wars, military wars. And the new interventionist aid phase is going hand in hand with the redefinition of an international balance of powers, which has been accelerated by the Ukraine war. There is no doubt that this war, that is a consequence of President Putin's decision to attack, to bring an aggression to another country, following a logic that you could find in the history, First World War, Second World War, surely had the result of polarizing even more the system. I used to say that as in physics, to an action, there is a reaction that is equal and opposite. You had a process that was carried on by Russia and a reaction on the other side with a very strong polarization that, of course, brought the system to a sort of breaking point. There is a first consequence that I would like to put in evidence in the discussion today. Professor Pellicciari did show us how this system is working and is following the targets and the aims of some leaders in the Western world and in Russia. But I would like to recall to everyone that what is really getting weak here is the multilateral system and multilateralism as a general criteria driving the international relations. Everything that Igor Pellicciari told us is bringing us to the bilateralization of the foreign policy. It is so bilateral, everything, that a diplomat, as I was till 2 months back, is quite surprised by the fact that was denounced in his analysis that important multilateral institutions, to some extent, renounce to carry on their function in this crisis, plural. We have countries, we have administrations, we have leaders that took stands, took initiatives, tried to present proposals. I recall you the case of Ukraine. We cannot say that leaders did not do their best in order to prevent this war. We had in front of us in December the Russian proposals that were brought to the attention of the United States government and NATO government. We had the initiative of Turkey, President Erdogan in March 2022, just a month after the beginning of the war. We had the initiative of President Zelensky with a plan in 10 points. We had the initiative of the Chinese that brought a master plan on 12 points to the attention of Kiev and of Moscow. We had the African Union, even the Brazilians, with their ideas that were discussed. We don't see here initiatives of multilateral institutions as European Union or United Nations. It's symptomatic of the status of the situation. The second conclusion that I would like to evidentiate in this analysis is, where are we going now if we don't put an end to this degeneration? I have an economic background myself. I have graduated at the Bocconi University in Milano. I tend to try to explain process and things very much on economic, with economic criteria, and many times I make mistakes. I was so economical myself, I tell you openly, that when this crisis started and when Putin attacked Ukraine, I was one of those, and there were many, that was convinced that it was impossible even to imagine a big war between this big country, because Ukraine is big. It's a large country. Because Russia was keen to throw away the gigantic potential of resources for small territorial claims that have a very great importance in their analysis, but to me, as an economist, was a gigantic waste of resources, gigantic waste of money, gigantic waste of men, of people, of everything. So my analysis was too much economical. But there is one economical point that I would like to put to your attention that, in my opinion, is under our eyes, but maybe not too much portrayed also by the press here in the West, but also in Russia. In Russia, we have now a public expenditure that is devoted at this point by more than 30% to the war. We have big groups that have to serve the war. Serve the war means divert resources from added value initiatives to the war. The war is transforming the Russian economy in an economy of war, following I would say, proto-Keynesian model, with a large public expenditure, of course, production, of course, new jobs that are employing people working for the war and serving the war. There is a benefit on the first stage when you launch an economy of war in a country that has resources and the possibility to drive the economy of war to some direction. But as an economist, I would tell you that is probably much better on the long run to invest on a tractor rather than on a tank. On a tank, of course, you develop technology that you can employ on other sectors. But this tank will be destroyed by another tank or by another bomb, while the tractor carry on producing and creating added value on one sector. This is a very small case, but you can imagine, and you are young and you know the world, how it goes. There are a gigantic number of sectors and things that we can develop to create our future and the prosperity of an economy and to stimulate the prosperity of an economy. An economy of war is renouncing to this possibility, to these possibilities. And this is happening in Russia. But unfortunately, when you start in a country of this dimension a process of that kind, you have a reaction. And so, in the Western world now, we have the budget for defense that is growing in every country. This means diversion of resources from other sectors. And partially, the building of an economy of war also on the other side. The economies of war, to prosper and to enlarge, geopolitically speaking, and also geoeconomically speaking, need tensions and hybrid and real conflicts. I mean that in a system that is renouncing to a very efficient multilateralism and is going in the direction of an economy of war, inevitably we could grow in this direction and we could have a number of conflicts spread in regions because you have groups that are investing in military technology. It's a terrible economic logic that has a logic. Secondly, the economy of war, to develop in efficient terms technology, need a theater of war. Russia, as Western technology, went through a number of tests in Ukraine, and a lot of people died because of these tests. Ethically speaking, this is terrible, but in economic terms, it makes sense. It's much easier and better to quantify the damage that you make to a city or to a group of soldiers in reality rather than in a simulation. This drives me to the first conclusion that this process is following a very dangerous logic, because history shows in the past that when there is an escalation going on one direction, it's very difficult to come back. The escalations have to be stopped in time. In time. I worked all my time for helping our companies in the international markets to grow, but at the same time, being a diplomat, I worked in different scenarios to make sure that peace could prevail on this logic. If you go back in the history, there was a period of time in which, with clear visions, leaders that came out from the Second World War, in the United States, as in Russia, as in Europe, started negotiating at the time of the Iron Curtain. The result of this negotiation was the Helsinki I Treaty that was signed in 1975. But what was the logic at the basis of this treaty? The logic was, why don't we stop in time this race towards an economy of war? Because we have our priority. Russia has the priority to grow and develop. In the 70s, it was really a very poor country, Russia. And the West, the same. To some extent, the 1975 agreement helped this country to grow as well, because the Iron Curtain was still a reality, but there was some moderation on the tension, because it was a treaty that was shaping a security system in the continent. On that side, the Russians could divert some resources from the military system to other systems, and at the same time, this on the Western side. Now, you know that those that came after the 70s, and I'm talking about Gorbachev, I'm talking about the American counterparts of Gorbachev, went even farther, and they built a number of format of dialogue with the Europeans. And there was a moment, a magic moment, in which things were working in the right direction, in a multilateral direction. Number of treaty, the START treaty, a number of treaty in the non-proliferation format were signed. We now are in front of a sort of degeneration of the system again, in the direction of a logic of blocks. Living in Russia, you are continuously targeted as an ambassador of the collective West. The collective West is an invention, does not exist. Italy is not France. France is not the United States. We have different priorities. We have similar models, yes. We believe in similar values, democracy, human rights, and other values. But you cannot make the collective West as a model. It's a way to create blocks, to create separations. And why now I think that it would be a great priority to restart as fastly as possible a multilateral negotiation, recreating a multilateral security system in the European continent. Why do I think it's so urgent? First of all, in order to stop this process that is going towards the so-called economy of war, an economy of war that devastated entire regions. Imagine what is Syria now. You have generation of young boys that never did any other job that is the soldier or fighting. They don't have any skill. So how do you come back? Lebanon, there are many. Syria is a terrible example. I think that it is so urgent to reestablish this multilateral system, because I think that there is a clear economic complementarity between Russia and the European continent. But there is a clear complementarity. We are talking about the big basin of manufacture of the world that is Europe on one side and of high technology. We're talking about high technology on the other side, Russia, and a very big basin of natural resources and energy resources. So it's quite artificial, this division in economic logics. But we have also another important tool to consider, China. This country, Russia, is in between the two giants, together the United States on the other side, of the economy of the world. It's a sort of suicide, according to an economic logic, not building an Eurasian pattern. The Eurasian pattern is the future here. It's really a building a model that is a win-win model, there is no doubt. That's why I think, and I hope, that the European governments and the European institutions will find the courage and the determination to make important proposals in this field. Proposals that will be surely very different from the proposals of the 70s. You're reading the papers, you go on the social network, you watch the TV, you see analysis on the Ukraine war that are very much focused on the military dimension, on the consequences of sanctions for the Russian economy, but there are subjects, there are topics that are completely out of the radars for a long time. The environmental problem that is urgent, it's very important, and it has been probably exacerbated by this conflict. We don't know what is the consequence, and nobody show us the consequence in terms of environment of this conflict. What kind of weapons are they employing in that gigantic land that is Ukraine, that is close to Europe? We don't know. We don't know the poisoning of the land. Are we going to have the possibility to consume and to import again all this wheat from Ukraine? We don't know. We don't have any more analysis on the risk of drug smuggling, topics on which, of course, there are common interests between us, Europeans, the United States, and Russia and China. These are common wars that we have. The space, we can go ahead. So the future negotiation should embrace, probably in a different format, in larger format, because the world has changed, so with BRICS countries also, a larger number of topics, on which, of course, Ukraine is part. But on my opinion, the crisis in Ukraine is just a consequence of the lack of this mechanism of dialogue, We dismantled a number of format of dialogue between Russia and the West. There was a format of dialogue NATO-Russia and many others. They have been closed. This is dangerous. It doesn't drive anywhere. We have to find out a way to build again a just, we call it just peace, a peace that should take into account the rights of Ukraine, a country that has been attacked by another country. So we have to defend this principle, but we have at the same time to avoid conflict. There is no terrain for this. I am very worried by some journalists that talk about war with great liberty. It's like something that cannot be avoided. We have to stop this process. The last remark, I leave it to you. I think that you have a very big responsibility because you will be the ruling class of the future. I have the wish, really, the big wish, that you will be better than us. because what you see now is the failure of a system that was based on dialogue and peace. And we have to recover this before it's too late. You are in a fantastic university. Take advantage of your time, and please think that the dimension that you achieved as students studying in a faculty, prestigious faculty, in the prestigious European Union is the result of the effort of the past generations that tried to build up a system that was allergic, I would say, allergic to wars, allergic. Thank you so much for your time. And
thank you, Ambassador, for the very inspiring insight and reflections about war and peace in this time. And I would like to first ask to colleagues and Director of the PhD in Global Studies, Professor Zanfei, wants to ask something. Do you have any question? Yes?
I don't want to actually take more time because I think there might be questions and interventions from the floor. But I would like to say a couple of words concerning two basic issues that have been raised. One is exactly at the core of the book, I would say. That is the idea that foreign aid is actually a novel way of drawing in international relations, or is actually such a novelty. Actually, I would like to question this, and I would like to actually highlight that probably there is something novel, but not of what has been highlighted is so new. For instance, there's a whole list of things that you mentioned, which is very interesting indeed, like the speed of reaction, the absence of multilateralism and non-governmental organization, the recipient perceived as a partner, and so on. There are several things that I find very much in the rather ancient history of the US aid to Europe, in a way. I wonder whether it is something so new. And what I find very new, and probably should be even more highlighted, is that the use of aid is a novelty because it comes in the midst of war. This is the real novelty, because otherwise we've always been actually experiencing this kind of policy. So this is something that struck me as something that must be clearer. The second aspect that I would like to mention is the very, very important issue of military expenditure and public investment in military stuff. And I would say that this is a very, very key point, and even more impressive than the 3% of GDP that has been mentioned by the ambassador is the fact that the rate of increase has been dramatic. And we had, 10 days ago, we had a meeting with Professor Saraceno from Paris, and with the intervention of Professor Pianta as well. And what turned out is that over 10 years, we experienced in Europe a 170% increase in military expenditures as public investment. So this is something dramatic if you consider in comparative terms what has been spent in other more welfare-enhancing expenditures. So this is something really terrible from our point of view. And this comes to the final point that I wanted to ask as a question. It is true, that probably very, very important that we turn back from the aid to war to competition for aid, which is absolutely the best recipe we can have. But how can we do this? This is the dramatic question. At this point, are there any specific steps that we can take to move in that direction, given the absolute absence of the European Union, and given the fact that there is no multilateralism, as you mentioned? So this is something that really comes dramatic to me. Okay, thanks. I'm sorry for stealing their time.
Thank you, Professor Zanfein, and I guess that it's even more dramatic if you consider what Ambassador Starace was saying, that when you invest a lot on military economy, you also need a scenario in which you can spend the money that you invested. So there is a dramatic functionality in that.
Stock weapons up to a certain limit, then you have to get rid of them.
Yeah. So, yeah, sorry? Are there other, we have only a few minutes to talk with Professor Pellicciari and Ambassador, but are there some very quick questions that you want to ask them? Come on. Okay, Ross. Very quickly. Ross is our Ukrainian student in our PhD course.
First of all, I want to thank very much both Professor Pellicciari and Professor Starace, not only for the book, but for excellent insights that were shared today. And mine would not be rather questions, but rather, I would say, ideas for the future research on this topic. So first, how do we really deal with path dependence of the dynamics that is actually driving this conflict? I mean, I'm coming from Ukraine. I spent 17 years in the government down there. And I can say that right now in Ukraine, even to speak of peace, to speak of perspective of peace, would get you, if not in prison, then severely beaten and battered. And certainly, in Ukraine, there's currently a whole generation of elites that simply do not conceive any kind of peace solution, that see themselves as shareholders and beneficiaries in this war, that want this war to go on and develop and involve more of European countries. So how do we deal with that? And actually, as one of the ideas, also on behalf of the initiatives of the European Union, very thankfully we have this European integration process of Ukraine. And the wartime developments in Ukrainian governments, in Ukrainian reform, they have created so many new problems that dealing with these problems, like returning to the constitutional provisions, at least the basic ones, reinstating respect for human rights, talking about the protection of minorities in the context of future possible reconciliation, both inside Ukraine and between Ukraine and Russia, trying to create opportunities for new leadership, for new leaders to emerge in Ukraine who will be able to take over this task. And a third one that I would like to mention is the problem of rebuilding of trust in between Russia in Europe and the civilized world. Because actually the solution in the aid framework is clear. Now that the aids have become weapons to resolve this conflict, we need culture and ethics to become new subjects of Western aid. And Ukraine will accept this. The question is how Russia would accept this. Now that there's a growing understanding among different stratas of Russian society and decision makers that West cannot be trusted, which was one of the driving reasons for this war, and is one of the engines of all these events. So thank you very much. And I wish you find answers to those questions.
Thank you, Gerasimov, for this very hard question. Who wants to be the first for answering?
To the technical question of, then I would leave it
So you will make the first answer and then leave the floor to Ambassador. Okay. You want to answer here? Okay.
Yeah, I will stick to my diagnosis rule, and I think Professor Zanfei raised an issue. Actually, I apologize. This is like the first speech I have in public since like a lot of time. So periodization is a typical element of historian work. I mean, you try to understand the trends and. So I have my personal periodization of aid development. Don't forget my approach to aid, right? From the end of the Second World War until today. And I divide this aid in 4 phases, which is why I define the Ukrainian unprecedented, Ukrainian and COVID. I mean, when we will meet again, hopefully, with the colleagues of the global studies, I will go in detail and explain the methodology of the book and so on. But basically, to make it very short, I use the Max Weber ideal type model. So I create on purpose and extremize some features in order to catch the differences, right? Life is not, thanks God, life is not so schematic. I mean, but let's say brutally, the post-war, the first aid, structural aid in foreign policy is the reconstruction aid after the Second World War. And it's a very short phase. The Marshall Plan usually is. And but it's the beginning, but it's not yet it's still part of the World War II strategy, American strategy in Europe. And you can see it from the fact that reconstruction is a keyword, but it's called recovery fund. It's not treated as aid. It's treated like a support in order by Marshall, who was State Department, but he was also general. And all the plans to enlarge the Marshall Plan were kept like, no. This is like just, it's support not only to the defeated one. Actually, the partners, the allies, got even more than UK and so. And this created a political obligation, and it was treated with the American approach, like, okay, I'm going to finance you, but then you're going to pay me back somehow. It's not accompanied by the Point 4 Truman speech which opens the following phase, 1949, 1950. 1949 is the Point 4 Truman speech, which opens the cooperation development aid, which is actually, on the other side, it's the framing of what most of the common sense today considers the aid should be, which means post-forward colonies become independent. And by the way, economists gave us such a huge contribution. Actually, it was the only social science who first raised the hand by saying, this doesn't sound really like development. I mean, you're doing this, like neocolonialism has been conceptualized by economists in literature. sociologists a little bit, but sociologists have been fallen into this anthropological approach, and okay, which is fine. I'm not criticizing anybody. I'm just saying the first to raise the idea that aid maybe was not so good as it was were the economists. But this was the idea of the first one, reconstruction aid, until mid-50s. Then we have the aid to development, and this goes. Even today we have it, but the golden age is the 60s and the 70s, the new independent states. Then the Berlin Wall falls down, and we have a first unprecedented scenario. We help countries in Europe who enter in crisis developed. Hold on a second. By the way, you correctly pointed out, I'm comparing, Bosnia was a key center for aid in the transition during the war. The same donors which we say today running, at that time they were very passive. They would send the multilateral ahead, but Van-Soven plan, the Stoltenberg plan, the other they were like, trying to find the peaceful solution was a diplomatic game, and those who were dealing with aid of the people on these were the multilateral organizations, right? They were not. And then after that started the post-war in the Balkans and post-Soviet transition and aid to transition. My point is that the aid to transition is not success-oriented in the terms of the presented aid. The objective is to create political obligation, because if it were success-oriented, they would have supported democratic transition in these countries, and they did not, okay? So let me be very clear about this. The American literature shows us, actually, that the oligarchs were a result of the economical advisors of the Harvard Economy School, right? So I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just saying, look, first thing you learn when you have after a car crash, you don't, go to the victim and try to, either you know what to do or you just wait for the paramedics to arrive. Otherwise, you do not move, So this idea of, that was the aid to transition. I call it aid to transition because the objective is the political obligation of the donors is the way to enter into an interesting scenario. And aid is just one of, it's not really. With the COVID, I find in the book, I create there is more similarities between, Professor Zanfei, between aid in the COVID structurally and aid in Ukraine, rather than between aid in Ukraine and aid to Sarajevo, which are basically very similar scenarios, at least in their DNA. I mean, two are post-war, actually war outbreak, and you correctly pointed out. You know what is unprecedented? Why usually aid in the war has been humanitarian? Because aid in the war, in a war situation, you have no instruments to exercise normal audit, control on how. So usually humanitarian aid in the war is fragmented in little packages, and you accept the inevitable loss of some of these aid in order to have the bigger part successful. But as I like to point out recently, and this is, I'm done with this, if you lose like 12–14%, which is like acceptable in a humanitarian environment of a war intervention. If you lose 14% of 100 kilograms of rice, it hurts. If you lose 14% of high technological weapons, like the javelins, these single shooters missiles, each one costs about $250,000. Well, that's a different game. Then you start seeing those. What did COVID show us? It surprised everybody. But then some categories got better organized than others. So they were not to be blamed because of COVID, of course. But later on, they started realizing that, hey, if this thing goes longer, it might be better for me rather than shorter. That's what we have to avoid now. We have to, go back instead of, I'm sorry, I'm going to say something very heretical now, but instead of advocating categories which in the literature have no definition, like a just peace, which I really cannot understand. You know, it is like, please give me a definition of a just peace. If it's a peace after a war, I'm sorry. I mean, I'm talking as a Bosnian, I mean, you have to accept compromises. But the point is, how do you put back the game in a situation where the main contenders have no interest or have a greater interest? Remember, that I told you, the donors have a greater interest than the recipients. So we should put it back in a way, and this is not, you don't do this with the marches of peace, or, no, I'm sorry, because if you're born peaceful, you're born peaceful. If you're born ready to fight, you will fight. But if you make it logical as a choice for your political survival, that to go that way is better, you will go that way. We've seen it, no? We know that politicians, in different ways, are ready to do anything to remain in power, right? So it's about changing the rules of the game. So this is like, but you will tell us maybe how, because...
How, thank you for your remark. The topic of building or rebuilding trust between the different sides is crucial. It's at the basis of everything, and unfortunately this war lasted for too long time, and the situation degenerated in terms of trust between the two parties. If we want to consider on one side the West and on the other side Ukraine with some Russia with some friends, and the rest of the world. I would say that so far we have this clear scenario in front of us. The military means failed. You have a war that is lasting since 2 years with not this important progress on one side and on the others. This should drive everyone to think that it's time to sit down and start to think about how to compose this conflict, because the military solution is far to be the only one to be considered. Politically speaking, I would say that so far Putin lost his war, because at the beginning this special operation was dedicated, let's don't forget, to the denazification of Ukraine, that in Russian terms meant change of government, change of leadership, replace of the current government, try to avoid this government to be ruled by these people that they denounced to be Nazis. This failed, and the result was, of course, the shifting even more clear of Ukraine in the direction of West. So Kiev, capital of Ukraine, is still the capital of Ukraine, thanks to this very heroic willing of the Ukrainians to defend their country. It is still there, and the government is still there. Politically speaking, Putin cannot be convinced to have won this war. He will never admit this, but he did not win this war. On the other side, politically speaking, we can say that Zelensky won his war because he resisted. He had the possibility to resist. The West helped, of course, but so far his government is there, and the country is ruled by his government. In territorial terms, Putin can say that he partially won his war, because the Russophone territories that he, through the Duma vote, annexed to the Federation are now, let's say, part of the Russian Federation on their point of view. On the other side, a part I think a fifth of Ukraine now is not anymore under the control of the Kiev government. And so we can say that this is a game that Ukraine lost so far. How do we deal with this situation? it is very dangerous, and I told the Russians so many times, to consider these American elections as the only important deadline to be watched. And probably for the reasons that were part of our discussions. The American system is driven by different mainstreams. I don't know. I don't really know if just after the American elections everything could change on one side or on the other side. I only know that, on my opinion, not only for humanitarian reasons, but for the reasons that we just depicted, the economy of war, the fact that we have to stop this degeneration and this degeneration of mistrust and hate between the parties, we have to find out at least a ceasefire, a truce, and then work from there on a negotiation. That is going to be extremely difficult, but it's a point of start. The role of Europe will be crucial. This conflict is in Europe. I am very sorry to see that what is going on is to some extent the repetition of the Balkans war, where the European leaders were not able to stop these degenerations, and then Clinton and the Americans were called and came in the scenario. I think maybe that after the European elections, this important test for the European public opinions, the European governments, some European governments, will find out the political willing and some initiatives in order to try to start a path that should go in the direction of a truce. It's urgent. I don't have any other solutions, unfortunately, in my mind, but I would love to have them.
Thank you. Thank you for Ambassador, for Professor Pellicciari, for all the people who came here, for the people who attended this seminar from their home. Now we have a very short pause, and then we are going to have a dinner together. To lunch, sorry, lunch together. But anyway, we have to stop here because Ambassador has to go back to Rome. And so thank you everybody for coming. And thank you to the University of Urbino and to Doctorate in Global Studies for organizing this meeting and this seminar.